Imagine waking up in the dead of night, your room filled with a strange, sickly sweet odor. Panic sets in as your body feels weak, your breathing labored, but there's no sign of an intruder. Outside, the streets of Mattoon, Illinois, are silent, yet reports of an unseen assailant spread like wildfire. Who, or what, was the Mad Gasser? Was it a deranged criminal, a government experiment gone wrong, or something even more sinister? This is the chilling true story of one of America's strangest unsolved mysteries, the Mad Gasser of Mattoon. Welcome to Old Around the World, where we travel back in time to bring histories to life. Mattoon, Illinois, was an ordinary town in the early 1940s, a peaceful community untouched by the chaos of World War II. But in the late summer of 1944, an eerie presence shattered that tranquility. People began reporting a strange intruder who sprayed a mysterious gas into their homes at night. The victims experienced dizziness, nausea, and temporary paralysis. As the reports increased, fear spread like wildfire, and the town found itself in the grip of paranoia. The first widely recognized attack occurred on the night of August 31st, 1944. A woman named Aline Kearney reported smelling a sweet, sickly odor in her bedroom. Moments later, she felt a numbness in her legs and was unable to move. Her husband, returning home late that night, saw a shadowy figure fleeing the scene. The police arrived but found no evidence of forced entry or any kind of chemical residue. The event was dismissed as hysteria until more reports emerged. Within days, the attacks multiplied. More residents described waking up to a noxious smell, followed by weakness and paralysis. Some claimed to have seen a figure in dark clothing lurking outside their homes. The newspapers gave the unseen assailant a name, the Mad Gasser of Mattoon. Whether it was a real criminal or a product of mass hysteria, no one could say. But one thing was certain: Mattoon was no longer a safe place after dark. Panic took hold of the town. Families boarded up their windows, armed themselves, and took turns standing guard at night. The police were inundated with calls, but every time they arrived at a reported attack site, the Mad Gasser had vanished without a trace. As the town searched for answers, the mystery only deepened, and fear turned into obsession. As September began, reports of gassing incidents became even more frequent. Victims claimed the gas had a distinct, sickly sweet smell, similar to garden flowers or perfume. The symptoms were always the same: nausea, dizziness, and an inability to move. The gasser never left physical evidence: no footprints, no broken windows, and no sign of forced entry. It was as if the attacker could appear and disappear at will. One of the most well-documented cases involved Carl and Beulah Cordes. On September 5th, Beulah was awakened by the strange odor and immediately felt her limbs go numb. She called out for Carl, who rushed into the room, but by the time he arrived, the gas had dissipated. Outside their home, Carl noticed a strange piece of cloth lying on the porch. When he picked it up, he was overcome with nausea and nearly fainted. It was the first piece of physical evidence linked to the case. But still, no one could explain where it came from or how the gasser had operated. The police investigated every claim, but found no solid leads. Some officers speculated that the gas might have been delivered through open windows using a spray device, or even released through ventilation systems. But there was no consistency in the attacks. Sometimes, windows were left open, other times they were closed. The Mad Gasser seemed to have supernatural abilities, striking unpredictably and vanishing without a trace. As the days passed, Mattoon's fear turned into chaos. Neighbors formed watch groups, armed with rifles and shotguns, determined to catch the gasser in the act. Parents kept their children indoors, and rumors spread that the gasser was a mad scientist or even a Nazi spy testing chemical weapons. But despite the growing hysteria, the attacks showed no sign of stopping. The mad Gasser of Mattoon became a national sensation, with newspapers across the country covering the bizarre story. But as the mystery deepened, so did the speculation. Who, or what, was behind these attacks? Law enforcement and journalists proposed a number of theories, ranging from logical to outright bizarre. One of the leading theories suggested that the mad gasser was an actual person using ether, chloroform, or some other anesthetic gas to incapacitate victims. However, no burglaries or assaults were ever reported in connection with the gassings, making the motive unclear. Why would someone go to such great lengths to terrorize a town without stealing or harming anyone physically? Others believe the culprit was a chemist or scientist experimenting with a new type of gas. The fact that Mattoon was home to a chemical plant only fueled these suspicions. Could an employee have stolen dangerous chemicals and used them to frighten the town? Some theorized that the gasser might have been a disgruntled worker with a personal vendetta. But perhaps the strangest theory of all was that the entire phenomenon was nothing more than mass hysteria. Some psychologists suggested that the fear of war, combined with anxiety over local crime, had caused residents to imagine symptoms and see an attacker who wasn't there. It was an idea that divided the town. Was the mad gasser a real person, or simply a ghost born from collective fear? With each passing night, fear tightened its grip on Mattoon. Police patrols were increased, and residents took extreme precautions, locking their doors, sealing windows, and keeping weapons within reach. The town had never seen anything like this, an invisible assailant striking without warning, leaving no footprints or evidence. Some believed the police were not doing enough, while others argued that there was nothing to be done. Local authorities were flooded with reports, but patterns remained elusive. Some attacks happened in the early hours of the morning, while others occurred just after sunset. The gasser showed no clear preference for victims, young or old, rich or poor. It made no difference. The randomness only fueled the paranoia, as people realized that no one was safe. Despite their efforts, law enforcement found themselves chasing shadows. One officer claimed to see a suspicious figure darting through a backyard, but by the time he gave chase, the figure had disappeared. Others found damp rags near attack sites, but tests for chemicals proved inconclusive. The mad gasser was always one step ahead, making the town feel helpless. Local newspapers added to the hysteria, printing bold headlines about the gassings. The media's coverage ranged from concerned reporting to outright sensationalism, with some papers suggesting that Mattoon was under attack by a mad scientist, a Nazi spy, or even a supernatural entity. While some dismissed these ideas as ridiculous, fear kept the town awake at night. One of the most chilling encounters came when Mrs. Bertha Birch, a Mattoon resident, claimed to have seen the gasser with her own eyes. Late one evening, she awoke to a faint hissing sound outside her window. Moments later, she smelled the familiar sickly sweet odor and felt her legs weaken. Before she lost all strength, she managed to glance toward the window and saw a dark figure standing in the yard. The shadowy figure, dressed in dark clothing, appeared to be wearing some kind of mask. Before she could scream, he vanished into the darkness. Mrs. Birch's husband ran outside with a rifle, but found nothing. The description she gave matched those of other sightings. A tall, thin figure who moved swiftly and seemed almost inhuman in the way he escaped capture. This encounter terrified the town even more. Up until this point, the Gasser had been an unseen menace, a phantom in the night. Now, there was a face, albeit a masked one, to match the fear. Some residents doubled their security, while others packed their bags and left town entirely. For those who stayed, every shadow became suspicious, and every scent in the air felt like an omen of another attack. Some skeptics, however, started to doubt the entire story. The police still had no concrete evidence, and medical experts found no lasting effects on victims beyond temporary symptoms. Was the town scaring itself? Or was the mad Gasser truly a master of stealth, escaping capture night after night? As the panic grew, so did the number of false alarms. Almost every night, someone reported seeing a dark figure lurking outside their home. Entire neighborhoods took to the streets, forming search parties and carrying weapons, convinced they would catch the mad Gasser in the act. But these searches only led to confusion, and more often than not, innocent bystanders were mistaken for the attacker. In some cases, local pranksters took advantage of the chaos, pretending to be the Gasser to scare their neighbors. A few were caught, punished, and dismissed as attention seekers, but their actions only made it harder for the police to separate real incidents from fabrications. Some wondered if the entire town was being played by a hoaxer, while others insisted that at least some of the attacks were genuine. Medical professionals started speaking out, suggesting that the symptoms people experienced, dizziness, nausea, and paralysis, could be explained by anxiety, not gas. Fear itself could have been making people sick, causing their minds to manifest symptoms that weren't physically real. This theory did little to calm the town, as many still believed that they had seen and smelled something tangible. As more cases were debunked, authorities began questioning whether the mad Gasser had ever truly existed. Was Mattoon under attack by a real person? Or was the entire town caught in a web of fear, paranoia, and self-deception? By mid-September 1944, the reports began to slow down. Fewer people claimed to have been attacked, and the sightings of the Gasser became less frequent. The police, struggling with public pressure, began dismissing new reports more aggressively, chalking them up to mass hysteria or outright hoaxes. After weeks of terror, something changed. The gassing stopped. No new reports surfaced, and suddenly, the town that had lived in fear for weeks found itself quiet again. It was as if the mad Gasser had vanished into thin air, just as mysteriously as he had arrived. With no arrests, no suspects, and no concrete evidence, the case remained open-ended. Some residents still believed they had been attacked by a real person, while others accepted the idea that they had been caught up in hysteria. The lack of resolution left a lingering unease. If the Gasser had been real, had he simply moved on to another town? Was he still out there, waiting for the right moment to return? Although Mattoon eventually returned to normal, the scars of the incident remained. Families who had lived in fear for weeks found it difficult to shake their paranoia. Even years later, some townspeople still locked their windows at night, just in case. In the years following the mad Gasser scare, various theories emerged attempting to explain what had happened. While some held on to the belief that a real attacker had been responsible, most experts leaned toward mass hysteria as the primary cause. Psychologists noted that the fear of war combined with the stress of everyday life, could have led to widespread panic. At the time, the United States was deep into World War II, and the fear of chemical attacks was ever present. The mind, under extreme stress, is capable of producing physical symptoms, which might explain why so many people believe they were being gassed. Another possible explanation involved industrial pollution. Some researchers speculated that emissions from a nearby factory might have caused the symptoms. If unusual fumes had drifted into residential areas on certain nights, residents might have mistaken them for an attack, unknowingly feeding the hysteria. However, no conclusive evidence supported this idea. Despite these rational explanations, some still believe that the mad gasser was real. Without an arrest or definitive proof, the truth remained elusive, leaving the case open to interpretation and debate. The legend of the Mad Gasser of Mattoon became one of America's most famous unsolved mysteries. The event was frequently cited in psychology studies as a classic case of mass hysteria, and it became a cautionary tale about the power of fear and rumor. Over the years, the case inspired books, documentaries, and even urban legends. Some paranormal enthusiasts suggested that the gasser had been a ghost or an alien visitor. Others speculated that the attacker had simply moved elsewhere and continued his work in secrecy. Mattoon, once a quiet Illinois town, became famous for its brief but intense brush with terror. Even decades later, locals still discuss the case, wondering what had really happened during those strange September nights in 1944. The case remains unsolved, and the identity of the Mad Gasser, if he ever truly existed, remains unknown. To this day, the Mad Gasser of Mattoon remains one of history's greatest unsolved mysteries. Was it a criminal mastermind with an unknown motive? A prank gone horribly wrong? Or simply the result of mass panic during a stressful time? While logic suggests mass hysteria played a role, the reports from credible witnesses, the strange symptoms, and the sheer number of accounts make it difficult to dismiss the case entirely. As long as the truth remains unknown, the legend of the Mad Gasser will continue to haunt the history books, an eerie reminder of how fear can spread like a shadow in the night. If this freaked you, and you liked it, please subscribe, like, share, and comment. Bye, history lover.